Welcome to the Page One Podcast, a podcast featuring a variety of guests and thought leaders on topics ranging from digital marketing, sales channel strategies, influencer marketing, best-in-class product launches, and all the details about how to accelerate sales. Now, here's your host, Luke Peters.
Thanks for joining us on the Page One Podcast. I am your host, Luke Peters, CEO of Newer Appliances and retail brand digital strategy agency. We're now in a coronavirus world, and I know that's on everyone's mind, so I'm going to adapt all of the interviews to ensure that you, the listeners, are getting the most out of this podcast. You can expect us to get right to the point and provide valuable business insights with a focus on COVID-19 impacts. And before I get to this episode, business owners, how are you guys doing with your digital sales? How are they performing? Do you wish you had someone to create a custom strategic plan to grow your online business? That's what I do. And if you're interested, find me on LinkedIn or luke@retailband.com. So in this episode, you're going to learn from Bruce Kaminstein on China, the supply chain. Can it be moved? And where do we go from here after COVID-19? Bruce is board director, executive, and entrepreneur driving strategy, profitability, and high impact growth for retail and consumer brands, has an expertise in domestic and international manufacturing, product development, and sales, an advocate for developing strong organizational cultures to drive employee retention, experience in M&A, and working with private equity investors. He's the founder of Casabella, a global housewares products company that was recently sold to Bradshaw International, and he's passionate about bringing well-designed products to consumers. He's also the past chairman of the board of the International Housewares Association, an organization that represents the $85 billion housewares industry. Bruce, welcome to the Page One Podcast.
Thank you, Luke. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. And then, just for the audience, Bruce lives on the East Coast in New York, and I thought we'd start there with COVID, Bruce. So are you able to give us kind of a tangible feel of how things were in New York, how COVID has impacted the city? We hear it all the time on the news, and a lot of us, are in areas that aren't as heavily impacted, and it'd be great to get your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, Luke, we live in New York City, but we evacuated 6 weeks ago to fortunate enough to have a lake house in Berkshire County, Massachusetts. So we left. So we have a lot of friends. We live right in Manhattan, and talk to my friends every day, Zoom, FaceTime, and a lot of community. And I think the thing is, New Yorkers are really tough. I think there's really it generating a sense of community. I think there is a lot of respect for government. Cuomo seems to be very high ranking right now in the polls. And, at 7 o'clock every night, my friends all open up their windows and they clap for first responders. So I think it's really a big sense of community. In terms of everyday life, it seems to be enough food, people wearing masks, people going for walks. It seems to be a sense of order. I'm not there. I do plan to go next week to make a visit to my apartment, which I miss, and say hello to some friends. Social distance, of course. But I think it's really, people are respecting, the virus and respecting social distancing. And it's just a way of life now in the city.
Yeah, and it is interesting how Cuomo, he's on TV every day, and it's interesting. He has done a good job as far as leadership goes and just being kind of honest and real. I think that's why people are kind of, gravitating towards him, because he just says it like he sees it. And that is pretty cool about opening the windows. And sometimes it the New York culture and the community, because sometimes you think of New York, at least from a West, being me living on the West Coast, you think everybody in New York is rude and fast paced. Of course, I'm just kind of, making a general comment, but it is kind of cool to see the community that's over there.
Yeah, New Yorkers are tough. We went through a lot. September 11th, Sandy, it's tough. It's a tough environment, but people love each other, and what really I listen to his press conference most days. It's on my way to the dump because we have to take our own garbage out here.
Oh, funny.
And I listen to him, and when he says New Yorkers love, that's and we're tough, and it's okay to say love. And, that's what New York is all about. And I miss the city. I'm very fortunate to be where I am right now. I can walk outside. I can bike ride. I can, do things outside, which is important. Got some fresh air. But I miss the city. I really do. I miss my friends, and I hope to get back there soon.
And what are the companies? So you have a lot of contacts in the industry. So regarding COVID-19 and the business climate, and, we all know the general feelings of, of what's working and what isn't, but anything else that stands out to you as far as talking to friends or past colleagues and how their businesses are doing?
Extremely difficult. So I sort of grew up in the world of selling specialty stores, big box specialty stores, and most of them are closed. So their businesses are tough right now. Obviously, everybody sells Amazon, but not making up the difference from, thousands of big box stores that sell your product. And so most of my friends in the industry are experiencing, some really difficult times right now. Very, very difficult times. I'm fortunate I retired last month, so I'm not in the middle of it right now. But I always keep in touch with friends, and it's a very difficult time in the industry.
Yeah, it is. And Bruce, so the topic of this podcast, we're going to focus on supply chain in China, and you have a ton of experience. I mean, sourcing there, here, and all over the world. And so we'll, utilize that experience that you have. And why don't we start with the OEM? I think a lot of folks, especially like newer people sourcing from China, may not even think about what's so special about OEM contract manufacturing in China and why you really can't find it elsewhere. You want to talk about that and then why it's so hard to move the supply chain from China?
Yes. So when you look at our industry, housewares specifically, I think the number is 80 to 90% sourced overseas. Our industry is people with ideas. That's how I like to put it. We innovate here and we make product elsewhere. And this has sort of gone over the last 30 years. I guess, I've been in business now 30 years. Before that, it was more like these ideas came along with a factory and you built your ideas. So those ideas, were made within the United States or within the country with the brand. Now it seems like in the last 20 or 30 years, the ideas are made elsewhere. And we have put most of our time and energy into innovation. And our capital has been put into innovation and not factory. So that's why, someone with an idea, a great idea of a garlic peeler or a mop or a broom, doesn't have to spend a tremendous amount of time or energy trying to figure out how to build it. Let's just understand how to make the product the best product possible and have somebody else worry about it. OEM manufacturers.
Yep.
So China has made, their whole economy based on this. Branding was not so important for them as opposed to making the world's product, making all the product of the world and putting other people's brands on it. They did that. One of the few countries in the world that really focused on that. Apple Computer, when you look at everything that we make, that we build, it's mostly overseas. And this is a trend that's happened for the last 30 years.
Yeah. Now it's interesting to talk about it because a lot of times we don't actually think about this. We just think, okay, China makes it and you can't find it in India. But why do you think China became a contract manufacturer? Do you have any thoughts on why that's their thing and why that wasn't the thing of, say, Vietnam or India? I mean, it is to some extent, but not like China. Was that like a political thing? Was that or a cultural thing, or any thoughts on why that became what it is?
Well, I think it was definitely political. I think the government saw how to put people to work, and this was a way to put people to work. They made they zoned different cities, and the cities were just making product for other people. Ningbo, China, we make a lot of product. I started there 2001, 2002. It was nothing, dirt roads, and now, the amount of Ferraris and Porsches and 5-star hotels, and it's amazing. And so the country just made it easy to find companies. You had the Canton Show, which was just a show, what the world's OEM manufacturers. I mean, everybody, all the factories are there. I can't think of another country that has a show like that.
Yeah.
That's highlighting all of the manufacturers and products around China. They did a great job there.
Yeah. And you know, and look, I don't have the answers, but it is interesting how China did it. Other countries, Mexico is a strong manufacturer, but not like a contract manufacturer. At least it's not easy for me to go find factories and easily, I'm going to have to invest a lot more in design, in molds, dyes, everything else that's involved in bringing a product to life. Whereas in China, you don't have to. But it is interesting that other countries didn't kind of see what China was doing and then just say, whoa, that works. We're going to do it too. But maybe it's because China, they're state run. So they're able to, the government was investing instead of just letting a private sector figure it out. Is that why you think there was a divergence, or is there maybe something else to it?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it is what you just said. I think it was a government mentality to make the world's product. And you look at Mexico, you would think that Mexico, our back door, would be fantastic at making product.
Yep.
Okay, there's no great trade show there for people like you or me or an entrepreneur in the United States to go find an OEM manufacturer. Now, why is that? Do they not want to make product for other people? Do they focusing on their own brand? When I first started my business, we made product in Italy. Italy was probably the number one country for making mops and brooms and cleaning products. They had equipment. It was all mechanized. They made, the broomsticks. They had the machines to make the thin poles, the thin metal, which is very, very expensive. They were just so well, automated for that. Then what happened is the dollar sort of collapsed and it just got very expensive to make product there. But they also were Italy at that time was focused on making OEM and making product for other brands. But then they started just worrying about their own brand and their own markets. And China just didn't do that. China just was happy with making other people's products.
Yeah, and what an interesting thing about Mexico, by the way, because you're right, they're right to our south. They actually they are known as a strong manufacturing country in several areas, but it's interesting that this model didn't take over. There wasn't some more private investment. I'm sure there's reasons for it, but anyways, there's a lot to that. But yeah, it is interesting that this seems to be a China only thing. I mean, is that the main reason why it's hard to move the supply chains away from China? Or are there any other reasons?
Well, I think it's very hard to find companies that want to make OEM product, bottom line. I think the margins are thinner. Like if you were an investor, would you want to make your product for other people, or would you want to slap your brand and innovate for yourself and get more margin? I think it would be the second part of that question, second part of that answer. So to go make somebody else's product is very competitive. You're going to price it out with other people, other companies. So the margins are thinner for sure, as opposed to putting your own brand. So when you look around the world, there are not a lot of OEM companies, making other people's product as I see it. Now, we used to make plastic buckets and totes, and we still do in the United States. There are injection molders in the United States that's all they do is make OEM product. There's a lot of them. You have a machine and you pump out plastic product, and it doesn't really matter what brand you put on it. That doesn't exist for other types of manufacturing as I see it in the United States.
Yeah, I got a really, really smart friend, and he told me one time, and when the tariffs came in, they hit us both. He's got a business too. And he goes, Luke, I don't mind the tariffs as long as they stay around for 30 years. And then I think he's so smart. He's thinking like, okay, if it is stable, stability is the main thing. He's like, well, if they stay for 30 years, then eventually people will know, oh, okay, we can go invest in other areas. But then when you don't know if they're going to come or go, that's, I think, the problem with finding new countries to invest in. And that, that's kind of the conundrum we're at, right now. Do you think, so what are your thoughts? It was really interesting what you said earlier. You said, we innovate here and we make it there. And that is a cool way to think about it. But then it leads to some other problems. We have trade deficits. Let's talk about that a little bit further down in this interview. But first, we're going to have supply chain problems like we have right now with COVID, where we don't even make enough mass for, the country, or we don't make enough parts to make equipment because the supply chain is so long. So is it important, do you think, to move the supply chain back to the U.S., but then maybe more important, is it realistic to actually move it back to the U.S.?
It's a question of the day. It is such a pertinent question right now when you look at the masks being made in China and all the protective equipment made in China. Luke, it's a very interesting question. Should the government regulate where things are made for essential health products? Should the government get involved in that decision? Because it's not just a question of cost. I can make a mask for 20 cents in China, or is it 30 cents here? But is it for the benefit of the country to make it here and pay that 10 cents more? I don't know. I just threw out some numbers.
Yep.
But that's the big question right now. I don't believe that we should be making all our product here and go that way. We cannot take for example, the houseware industry, $80 billion and start to think we can make product here. It's impossible. When you look at a typical houseware company, look at yourself, look at, large companies that produce gadgets, garlic peelers and can openers and, food savers, and look at all the different types of materials. How many different types of machines, the know-how to make product here. We didn't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about that. The factories just, the companies here worry about producing and making, not producing, innovating great product and somebody else to make it. There's no way that we are going to be able to bring back that manufacturing here. I just don't see it. But the government may want to regulate and probably should regulate an essential product health-wise that we are seeing a shortage of. It is amazing to me. It's amazing to me, for example, aspirin, Advil, ibuprofen is being made in China. We don't make it here. These are big questions that need to be answered.
Yeah. The whole talk on pharmaceuticals made there, but not here. And and raw materials for these apparently are all coming from China as well. So
it's amazing to me.
There's a lot to that. But what about as a business? Now, you probably ran into this more than I did. So, your products, when you found a Casabella, I believe they're on the smaller side. I'm talking about dimensionally. And then on my category, we're selling a lot of appliances and kitchen electrics. And so they're on the bigger side. And, right now we are seeing some companies come in and sell, they're competing directly from China, right? So it's a China brand, or they'll come in here and, there's obviously huge companies like Medea, but there's other Chinese factories are making that decision to go away from OEM, or at least compete directly with brands that they're supporting on OEM. That's always a big topic. How have you, what are your thoughts on it, and how have you guys weathered that storm in the past?
Well, we never bought off-the-shelf product from a Chinese factory, not just Chinese or anywhere around the world, unless it was a consumable type of product like a sponge or a glove. We always like to add something that we get a patent on, or we innovated and didn't necessarily need a patent. So we don't want to compete with the Chinese. I never wanted to buy an off-the-shelf product, because then I felt like I'm not adding value as a company the way that we should be. My job was to innovate and produce it somewhere. And by the way, if that factory ever did get caught selling a product, that, hell to be paid.
Yep.
And we don't withstand that at all. So they are getting smarter right now with Amazon, we all know, and they are now starting to establish their own brands around the world and not just China. So that's why it is really important to innovate, to do something different.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And we all know, all the listeners know, that just takes more time. I guess you just got to plan further out on your product roadmap.
Yes.
And it's easy to just buy off the shelf. It is a lot easier, but you're right. There's more value creation when you innovate. Let's move on to trade deficits, because the thing is, part of this conversation, hey, China's, they're the shop that's making all these things. It's near impossible to move away for some categories. And I'm going to say specifically electronics. It's really, really difficult. I talked to somebody in her product. they need an LCD display in her product. And she was telling me there's literally nowhere else in the world you can get these LCD displays. And companies can say that for a lot of components. So even if they want to make somewhere else, they still got to bring in the LCDs but then we have these trade deficits, and it's interesting because even in the 80s and 90s, the trade deficits were the big talk, and our budget deficit ended up being a big problem. Whereas now our budget deficit's probably, I don't know where we are, like 20 trillion or more. And I mean, people were talking about it being a problem when it was 3 trillion, and now it's 20 trillion. It's unbelievable. But what are your thoughts on the trade deficit? Either how that impacts us as a country or how that should change, our future plans in our supply chain?
Well, I am a free trader. I mean, I think that one of the problems is that I think a big problem is that China doesn't accept our products. And I do agree with the current administration on trying to, level the playing field a bit, for sure, because we should be able to export just as easily as we can import. There are a bunch of markets around the world that have been protective of their own product, and hence I don't think their product is just as good as product in the United States by protecting it. We here have the best product in the world because we have allowed us to innovate and make product anywhere around the world and bring it back here with pretty relatively low duty and custom duty. So, this trade deficit, has been the way that we've been, surviving for the last 30 years. We allowed it to do. We've allowed it to happen. We have not, put huge custom duties, and we have allowed people to innovate here and make product elsewhere. Now, what I don't agree is that China should allow us to export also. Brazil should allow us to export also with the same duties that come in both ways. That's what I really believe in, and that's what I would strive for, is equal playing field.
Yeah, and it is amazing how Chinese government really has held strong on that, and it still is. I mean, I don't even think I can send, even if I want to send returns back, defective products back to factories, they still have to get like approval from the local governments, and it's just a different way of thinking and doing business. But it is a challenge.
It is a big challenge.
Yeah,
and we should be exporting more, and because we innovate here so much, and not possible without huge duties in going into the country, in specific countries, even Europe.
Yeah, and so tariffs are. I know you're not a big fan of tariffs. So is there an answer? I don't know if it's, we have all these smart people thinking about it, but there doesn't seem to be an answer to solving the trade problem or even defining clearly what the trade problem is. I guess the easiest part is, there should be free trade between all countries. Otherwise things break down. When one country won't let you export to them, but they want to sell to your, and the US is the most open of all the countries. But I mean, is there any one final position or comment or thought that you think would make the situation improved or better?
I don't have it, Luke. I don't know the answer. The tariffs have been destructive in that it has caused more of a war between the retailer and the supplier. It has caused a huge tax on the American public because you just had to increase the cost of your product. That's what it really did. I am not, aware of what's happening in terms of, is China loosening their export? Is China loosening their export duties, their import duties? I'm not totally aware of where we are there, but they have been destructive here. And also the unpredictability of the tariffs going up and down. I remember last year I was on CNBC, August. I remember this clearly. The administration put on a 15% duty. First it was 20%, or I think it was even 25% coming in on goods for September. So you had to react.
Yep, I remember that.
30 days. In 30 days. So, you know your supply chain. You have things ordered 120 days out.
Yep.
So what do you do? It's a big scramble. It was a huge waste of time, and I guess not realizing the impact that it would really have on negotiations with the retailers. Margins of companies here that innovate, that had to let go of people because all of a sudden they got a 15% cost increase. I mean, all of a sudden, overnight.
Yeah.
Didn't make sense to me. Not the way to do it. It's a long-term strategy on how to level out the playing field. That's how I think it should be.
Yeah, and I think what's another way to look at COVID? I mean, none of it's good, but a lot of companies in our business that had 25% tariffs, they've already leaned out their companies. Before COVID even arrived, they had to because all of a sudden their cost of goods got hammered, and so they were already thinking and doing half of the things that companies all of a sudden had to do now. I've seen that with a lot of my friends.
Yeah.
Hey, Bruce, why don't we move on and finish up here with, you founded, grew, amazing company, and then after 20 years you exited. And, a lot of business owners listening here and everybody always has to think about or hopefully plan for that day. What are 3 things that you learned about that transaction that you can share with or, help other housewares brands that are eyeing a transaction?
Okay. Good question. By the way, it's 30 years. I was in business for 30 years.
30 years. Sorry about that. Wow.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, a long time. I've been through a lot in this industry, and I love this industry. I think there's 3 important takeaways for selling a company or trying to figure out an exit strategy. Is number 1, I think it's really important to have, good, innovative product in the pipeline for years, and, what is that and how to innovate? And I think that's really, really important. I don't really have experience of just being a commodity buyer or seller of product. So we always had in our pipeline a decent amount of innovative product, something really different. And that's important to a buyer of a company, especially for the future. Like we were working on it. Just actually launched Earth Day yesterday at Target, a really cool new line called Infuse Cleaning, and it works on a cartridge system and it saves a lot of plastic. Worked on it for 4 years, and it just came to life. So I think that's really important. 2, I think, maybe even more important is your brand. How do you strengthen your brand? How do you make your brand the best possible brand in the industry and in your segment? That's really important in how you position your brand and how you support your brand. And the third thing, I think, especially looking after COVID, is diversification of your customer base, whether it's exporting to different countries, whether it's being grocery stores, mass, e-commerce, a good, balance of everything. So you're not relying on one channel or 2 channels. You have a whole, basket of markets, and export is important. It really is. Excuse me. So I think those 3 things are really important looking at business right now. And of course, basic things, books being really organized, your margins are strong. If they're not strong, you can prove why, there's a simple answer. All these things are really important.
That's a great list right there. And I'll quickly summarize, have innovative products and in the pipeline, build the best brand in the industry and be diversified in your sales channels. It's super important, and all for different reasons. You're more diversified. If you're working with banks, they like that, even if you're not having an exit, and building a brand nowadays, I think is probably could or should be. You got to be obviously the comment on having good profit margins. That's going to be important for any investor, but building a brand, is like a big moat for any company, a big protective thing. And especially now that we, as we talked about earlier with Chinese companies selling direct and with Amazon out there, you got to own your customer as much as you can. So couldn't agree more there. I think that's a great way to finish it. And Bruce, how can listeners, if they want to get a hold of you, or is there a preferred way to contact you, maybe LinkedIn or something like that?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm looking at my LinkedIn. That's a good way to contact me.
Awesome. And then listeners, you can learn more about Bruce there. And he's got a couple CNBC interviews, which is pretty cool to kind of talk about trade and supply chain. And you can get more information there. And we'll have those links in our show notes. Thanks again, Bruce, for being a guest on the Page One podcast. And also want to thank you, the audience, for listening today. And again, if you're a busy CEO, leader of a company, and you are not performing where you want to be on your digital sales, I can help. Get a hold of me. The Retail Band does exactly that for clients. And you can find me on LinkedIn or luke@retailband.com. And I hope you enjoyed the interview today. Really appreciate your reviews on iTunes, and we'll see you guys the next time. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Page One podcast with Luke Peters. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us out by leaving us a rating on iTunes. Want to double your online sales? Check out www.retailband.com. And don't forget to join us next week with our next amazing guest.